I can't breathe, and I don't know if it's from his hands or from knowing I'm about to lose everything. The room falls silent. A woman's voice, shattered like dropped glass. A man's shadow looms across her face. His fingers tighten around her throat, and somewhere in the darkness behind him, car engines rumble to life outside. Red and blue lights begin to paint the walls. Sirens cut through the October night like something alive and hunting. But this is not where the story begins. 23 hours earlier, Aria Voss stood in the bitter cold of a Los Angeles morning, and her world was a very different place. A place where she was still invisible. The wind whipped through the parking lot outside the grocery store on 15th and Main, tearing dead leaves across the cracked asphalt. The leaves spiraled in patterns that looked almost like chaos given shape. Aria clutched 2 plastic bags in each hand, the handles cutting deep into her palms, turning her fingertips the color of old bruises. Inside those bags were eggs, 2 containers of milk, a loaf of bread, and 6 cans of beans. Nothing more. She had $34 to her name. 2 weeks remained before the eviction notice became real, before the landlord, a man named Harold Brennan with teeth like yellowed ivory and a smell like cigarette smoke and anger, could legally change the locks on the basement apartment where she slept beside her children, the 3 of them crowded into one bed because the apartment only had one bed. 2 more weeks to find $22,000, or the street would become her address. Emma walked beside her mother, holding the older grocery bag with both small hands. The girl was 7 years old and already knew how to carry weight. She had learned young. Her brother Noah, for years younger, held Aria's free hand, his fingers small and uncertain in hers. "Mommy, can we get the cereal with the marshmallows?" Noah asked, his voice thin and hopeful. Aria did not answer. Her jaw was working through the math that consumed her every waking hour. Cereal with marshmallows cost $6.49. The generic brand cost $2.19. The difference was $4.30. That was $4.30 closer to homelessness. "We have the regular kind," she said quietly. Emma looked at her mother's face and said nothing. The walk home took 23 minutes. Aria knew because she timed it now, always looking for shortcuts, ways to save the bus fare that would cost $3 round trip. $3 a day. $15 a week. $60 a month. $60 was a third of the way toward a single night in a motel room that smelled like mildew and broken promises. Their apartment was in the basement of a building that had once been something grander. The windows were small rectangles high on the wall, letting in gray light and the sound of footsteps from the people who lived above them. The wall sweated in summer and froze in winter. A single radiator clanked and hissed through the nights like it was dying. Aria unpacked the groceries and placed them on the shelf with the same care a jeweler might arrange diamonds. Every item had been selected with brutal precision. Nothing wasted. Nothing frivolous. She had worked a double shift the night before at the Meridian Hotel, where she carried plates of food to people who did not look at her face. 12 hours on her feet. Her legs ached from ankle to hip, a dull throb that had become so constant she barely noticed it anymore. Her manager, Douglas Hale, had smiled at her when she left that morning, a smile that did not include his eyes. He was 56 years old, with gray hair slicked back against his skull and hands that wandered when he thought no one was watching. He had pocketed her tips yesterday. $47 that she had earned by carrying food, by smiling at people who treated her like furniture, by absorbing insults without response. When she asked him about it, he had leaned close enough that she smelled his coffee breath and said, "Consider it a fee for the privilege of working my restaurant, Aria. And maybe dress a little different. You're scaring away customers." She had not reported him. She could not afford to report him. The other jobs paid less. The other jobs were already taken. The other jobs wanted women who were younger, women who had not spent their 20s and early 30s burning through reserves of strength, women who could smile without it looking like an act of survival. At 4:38 in the afternoon, Aria left her children with their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who watched them for $10 a day. Mrs. Chen had 7 grandchildren and moved slowly, and Aria had trained Emma to be helpful, to pour the juice, to wipe Noah's mouth, to be small and quiet and not add to the weight of the world. Then Aria walked to the Meridian Hotel. The hotel sat on 7th Avenue like something that had learned to cast a shadow. It was 12 stories of glass and steel, and through the lobby windows, Aria could see chandeliers that cost more than the annual rent on her basement apartment. She had never looked directly at those chandeliers. Looking at them felt like opening a door to a different life, and that door was locked to her. Douglas Hale was waiting near the service entrance, smoking a cigarette despite the no-smoking sign above his head. He watched her arrive, and his eyes moved from her face down her body and back again. This taking of inventory happened every single day, and every single day Aria felt it like a hand moving across her skin. "You're late," he said. "I'm not late. My shift starts at." "You're late," he repeated, and the second time he said it, she understood that the time was irrelevant. She was late because he needed her to be late. He needed to establish that she owed him something. That her existence here was a gift. "I apologize," she said. He dropped his cigarette and stepped on it. The cigarette sparked under his shoe. "Victoria wants to talk to you." Victoria Ashford owned the Meridian. She was 62 years old, dressed always in clothes that looked like they had been designed for someone else, expensive clothes that hung on her thin frame like a threat. She had silver hair cut close to her scalp, and her fingernails were painted the color of fresh blood. She moved through the hotel's corridors like a woman who owned not just the building but the air inside it. Aria had seen her only twice before, both times from a distance. The third time was different. Victoria stood in the lobby, near those chandeliers that Aria had trained herself not to see, and she was looking at the other waitstaff, 5 women in black uniforms, standing in a line. Aria realized she was supposed to join them. She did, positioning herself at the end of the line. "Good afternoon," Victoria said, and her voice was smooth and cold, the voice of someone who had never worried about money or dignity or where she would sleep. "I have noticed that our service standards have declined. The complaints have been accumulating. It seems that some of our staff members are unmotivated, unprofessional, and frankly, forgettable." Her eyes moved across the line and stopped on Aria. "You," she said. "What is your name?" "Aria Voss." "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, 3 years, Victoria repeated, as if the duration was itself an insult. "And in 3 years, you have managed to be completely unremarkable. No guests remember you. No one speaks highly of your service. You blend into the background like a stain that won't quite wash out." She paused. Her fingers tapped against her thigh. "Do you know what I do with stains, Miss Voss?" Aria said nothing. "I remove them," Victoria said. "But not yet. Not until I've decided whether it's worth the effort. Until then, you will work additional shifts without additional compensation. You will smile. You will be grateful for the opportunity to improve. And if you fail to meet the standard I am about to set, if you complain, if you contact anyone about any aspect of your employment, I will ensure that you never work in this city again. Do you understand?" "Yes," Aria whispered. "Yes, what?" "Yes." Victoria Ashford turned away, moving toward the elevator, and as she passed Douglas Hale, she said something that Aria did not hear. But Douglas smiled that smile again, the one without eyes. That night, Aria worked until midnight. And the next night, she worked until 1 in the morning. The extra shifts were not written anywhere. They simply appeared in her schedule, and she understood that resistance would cost her the job that barely paid for her children's food. On the third night of the extended shifts, something shifted. It was 11:23 in the evening, and Aria was outside the hotel on a smoke break, not because she smoked, but because the other staff members took them, and those breaks were the only moments when Douglas Hale was not watching her. She stood in the October cold with her arms wrapped around herself, and the wind cut through her thin jacket like she was made of nothing at all. A black sedan pulled into the delivery entrance across the street. The car was expensive in a way that seemed to swallow light. The windows were tinted so dark that you could not see inside. A man got out, and even from a distance, across the street, in the dim light of the hotel's exterior lamps, Aria felt something change in the air around him. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of empires. His suit was dark, tailored so precisely that each thread appeared to have been placed with intention. A silver watch caught the light on his left wrist. His hair was black, and silver streaked through it like lightning frozen in place. And his face bore a scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a thin white line that looked like it had been carved there by something made of ice. He did not look at Aria. He did not even seem aware that she existed. He simply walked into the hotel, and the door closed behind him. Aria would not know that his name was Luca Bianchi, or that he had come to the Meridian because of a conversation that had taken place 3 hours earlier in an office in downtown Los Angeles. She would not know that he was searching for something, or that what he was searching for had already begun searching for him. What Aria did know was that she had 7 minutes left on her break, and that when she went back inside, Douglas Hale would be waiting. If this story has captured your heart, please hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. These stories matter because they remind us that change is possible, that invisible people can become visible, that sometimes the world corrects itself when we least expect it. Before we continue, let us go back to 24 hours earlier, to understand how Aria Voss arrived at this exact moment, carrying $34 and the weight of impossible choices. The story of how she saved someone's child without knowing she was saving anything at all. 24 hours earlier, Aria Voss stood in the pre-dawn darkness of her basement apartment, counting coins into a pile on the kitchen table. $17.43. The bill sat beside them like an accusation. The electric company demanded $210 by Friday. The water company wanted $130. And the eviction notice from Harold Brennan, the landlord who owned this crumbling building and 4 others like it, sat in her coat pocket, creasing against her ribs. $22,000 in unpaid rent and late fees. 14 days to pay it, or she and her 2 children would be on the street. The apartment was cold. October wind rattled the single-pane window above the sink, and she could see her breath forming small clouds in the kitchen light. The radiator had stopped working in September. Harold had promised to fix it. Harold promised many things. He promised to fix the leak in the bathroom ceiling. He promised to replace the carpet that smelled like mold and regret. He promised to be a man of his word, and he was just never the word he had spoken. Emma, her 9-year-old daughter, appeared in the doorway in her school uniform, which had been her older cousin's uniform 3 years ago. The navy sweater had a small hole near the collar. The skirt was 1 inch too long and 3 inches too thick at the waist. Emma did not complain about these things. She had learned, somewhere between age 6 and age 9, that complaining changed nothing. "Mama, do I have lunch money?" Emma asked. Aria's hand stilled on the coins. She thought of the cafeteria line, of children with packed lunches in plastic containers, of Emma standing alone with her tray. She thought of the free lunch program, and of the form that required her to write down how poor they were, to put a number to her failure. "You do today," Aria said. She separated $3 from the pile. $3 for Emma's lunch. $3 that would not stretch to groceries. $3 that meant something else would not be purchased, some other need would go unmet. Emma took the bills and folded them carefully. "Thank you, Mama." The word Mama did something to Aria's chest. It always did. It pulled tight like a fist around her heart, reminding her that she was responsible for this small human, for Emma and for Noah, her 6-year-old son, who was still asleep in the back room on a mattress that smelled of must and old rain. At 7:15 that morning, Aria left her children with Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment above them and watched them for $30 a week. Mrs. Chen had a kind face and patient hands and a living room that smelled like ginger and soy sauce. Noah loved to watch her cook. Emma loved to sit quietly on the worn couch and read library books. The walk to the Meridian Hotel took 42 minutes. Aria had timed it. She knew every crack in the sidewalk, every corner where the wind cut sharper, every storefront window that reflected her own image back to her. She wore a grey coat that had belonged to a woman at the shelter where she had stayed for 3 months after leaving her ex. The coat was too big. The hem dragged. But it kept the wind out, mostly, and that was all that mattered. The Meridian Hotel stood on Fifth Avenue like a declaration of what the world could be if you had money. The lobby gleamed with marble and brass. The carpet was thick enough to swallow your footsteps. Flowers arranged by someone with actual training filled the corners with impossible colors. Aria entered through the service entrance, a narrow hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and the grease trap that backed up every other month. Her uniform hung in a locker in the staff room. Black dress, black shoes polished to a shine she maintained with her own breath and an old cloth, a white apron that showed every stain. By 9 in the morning, she was moving through the restaurant with a tray balanced on her left hand, delivering eggs Benedict to people whose briefcases cost more than her monthly rent. Their eyes did not land on her. She was a function, like the silverware or the coffee cup. Her purpose was to appear and disappear, to refill and remove, to exist in the space between their conversations without actually occupying it. "More coffee," a woman said without looking up from her phone. Aria poured. The coffee was hot. The woman's tone was cooler. At 11 o'clock, Douglas Hale appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was a broad man with the kind of face that had probably been handsome before cruelty had settled into the lines around his mouth. He wore a suit that fit well. His shoes were expensive. His watch was the kind that made statements about power. He owned the restaurant's operation, reported to the hotel's owner Victoria Ashford, and had learned early that the people who worked beneath him had no one to report him to at all. "Aria," he called out. "You're working the private dining room tonight. 8 o'clock. Don't be late." She nodded. The private dining room meant a smaller tip pool, which meant fewer tips to split among more servers. The private dining room meant the drunk businessman who always touched the small of her back when she poured his wine. The private dining room meant she would be home after midnight, which meant Mrs. Chen would charge her an extra $20 for overtime childcare, which meant she would have to choose between feeding herself and feeding her children. "Yes, Mr. Hale," she said. "Good girl," he said, and the word girl landed like a weight. At 4 in the afternoon, Aria's shift ended. She had earned $42 in tips, minus her share of the hostess station, minus the percentage that went to the busboys. She left with $31. With the 17 and change from that morning, she had $48 and change to last until her next paycheck, which arrived on the 15th. It was the 8th today. She stopped at the grocery store. Milk for Noah, who was still growing and needed it, though she and Emma drank water most nights. A bag of rice. Dried beans. A loaf of bread that was on sale because it expired tomorrow. Eggs. She picked up eggs, then put them back. Too expensive. She picked them up again. Emma had asked for eggs. She kept them. At the register, the total was $27.19. She paid in cash and walked home carrying bags that cut into her palms, her fingers going numb from the weight and the cold. The prayer card was in her coat pocket, worn soft from being handled. Her mother had given it to her when she was 17, the night before Aria married a man who would spend 8 years finding new ways to hurt her. The prayer card showed a woman in blue, serene and distant, looking toward something beyond the frame. On the back, in faded print, were words about protection and guidance and light in darkness. Aria did not pray anymore, but she kept the card. She kept it the way other people keep photographs or letters. It was proof that someone, once, had wanted her to be safe. She did not know that at that exact moment, 3 miles away, a boy named Marco was coming down with the kind of fever that would put him in a hospital bed within hours. She did not know that his father, Luca Bianchi, was preparing to take him to the emergency room at St. Mary's. She did not know that their paths would intersect on a Tuesday afternoon at 4:31, on the corner of 5th and Maple, in a moment so small and ordinary that it would burn through both their lives like a spark through kindling. All Aria knew was that she had to be back at the Meridian by 8 o'clock. Her children were safe. The rent was still due in 13 days. And somehow, between now and then, she had to perform the impossible. While she counted the remaining coins in her pocket, Luca Bianchi stood in the underground poker room of the Meridian Hotel, watching $20 million shift across a green felt table. The room smelled of cigar smoke so thick it hung like fog, and armed guards in tailored black suits stood at every corner, their eyes tracking the movements of men who carried empires in their hands. Luca himself was 6'2", muscular and broad-shouldered, his Italian suit costing more than Aria's yearly rent. His dark hair silvered at the temples, his face a landscape of controlled power, and a scar ran from his left eye down to his cheekbone, a reminder of the night his brother had betrayed him to the Valentino family. That scar had aged him. At 47, he looked like a man who had buried more than his share of dreams. The gold watch on his wrist caught the overhead light as he reached for his drink. His lieutenant, Tony Moretti, stood 3 feet behind him, legs slightly apart, ready for anything. Beside him stood Nino, younger, sharper, the kind of man who had learned loyalty in blood. They had worked for Luca for 15 and 12 years respectively. In all that time, they had never seen him smile at a card table. Smiling was for men who had something left to lose. Luca had lost his mother to tuberculosis when he was 9. He had lost his wife, Elena, to a miscarriage and then to her own grief when she could not survive the weight of it. He had lost his brother, Carlo, to ambition and greed. Carlo had sold family shipping routes to the Valentino organization. Carlo had whispered their warehouse locations to rival enforcers. Carlo had, on a Tuesday night in October 15 years ago, tried to kill Luca himself, a knife aimed at the throat that Luca had intercepted with his hand, leaving that permanent scar running down his face. Luca had made a choice that night between mercy and survival. He chose survival. Carlo had disappeared into the Los Angeles underworld and was never heard from again. That choice had made Luca the most feared man in the city. It had also made him hollow. His son, Marco, was 10 years old and had been born with cerebral palsy. The boy could walk, barely, with significant effort, and his speech came slow and carefully measured. Luca had spent $240,000 on surgeries and therapies and specialists in 4 different states. The boy still struggled. The boy still limped. But the boy was alive, and Luca would have spent 10 times that amount if it meant keeping him breathing. At that exact moment, while Luca sat in the underground poker room with money stacked before him like an offering at an altar, Marco was at school, moving through the hallway slowly between classes, his left leg dragging slightly. His physical therapist had told him to practice walking in crowded spaces. It made the muscles work harder, she said. It made them stronger. Marco did not feel stronger. He felt exposed, like everyone could see the malfunction, like his body was a broken machine that should have been discarded long ago. He did not see the delivery truck backing up toward the loading dock near the side entrance. He did not see the driver, distracted by his phone, failing to check his mirror. He did not see the metal bumper swinging toward the cluster of students leaving the building. But Aria Voss did. She had been walking past the school at 4:22 in the afternoon, cutting through the parking lot on her way to pick up her own Emma from aftercare. She was thinking about Douglas Hale's hands on her waist that morning, the way he had trapped her against the kitchen counter at the Meridian, his mouth against her ear saying things that made her skin crawl. She was thinking about the $22,000 due in 13 days. She was thinking about anything except the delivery truck until Emma screamed. Aria turned and saw the child limping directly into the truck's path. Time did not slow down like they say it does in movies. Time accelerated. Her legs moved before her brain caught up. She sprinted forward and yanked the boy away from the bumper by his shirt collar, pulling him hard against her body just as the truck swung past, missing him by less than a foot. The impact of her pull sent them both to the ground. The boy's glasses flew off his face. Aria's groceries scattered across the asphalt. The truck came to a stop 10 feet away. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the boy started crying, soft, measured sobs that came from his chest like he was used to pain, like his body knew how to process it. Aria knelt beside him, her hands shaking, checking his arms and legs for injury. The crowd of students gathered but kept their distance. Teachers came running. Parents arrived. But the only thing Marco Bianchi could process through his fear was that this stranger, this woman with the worn coat and the calloused hands and the fierce, protective grip, had just saved his life. And the only thing he could say, when he finally managed to speak, was her name. "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." Across the city, in the underground poker room, Luca's phone vibrated. A text from his driver. "Marco safe. Accident at school. Woman intervened. Coming now." Luca read those words twice. Then he stood without another word, leaving $5 million on the table, leaving his men in stunned silence, and walked toward the parking garage where his black SUV waited with its engine running. The October wind cut through the streets like teeth as they pulled out into traffic. The city was moving toward evening, the sun already low and brutal, the temperature dropping. Luca sat in the back seat with his hands folded, saying nothing, his scar catching the reflection of the streetlights. When they arrived at the emergency room at St. Mary's Medical Center, he moved through the entrance with the kind of authority that made people step aside. His men followed 3 steps behind. Marco was sitting on a hospital bed in room 317, his left arm in an ice pack, his mother gone, she had never been in the picture, and his small frame shaking under a thin blanket. When he saw his father, he reached out, and Luca Bianchi, the man who had murdered 14 people and buried 2 of them in his own backyard, sat on the edge of a hospital bed and held his son like he was made of glass. "The woman," Marco whispered. "Where is she?" The doctors had already asked Marco the same question. Aria had refused to stay. She had given her name only because they needed it for the report. She had left her number reluctantly, had explained she needed to pick up Emma, that she had work in 4 hours, that she could not stay. She had limped away with a scraped knee and a palm that was bleeding where the asphalt had caught it. But she had left something behind. When the doctors removed Marco's jacket, they found her prayer card. It had fallen from her coat pocket when she had pulled the boy away from the truck. The card showed a woman in blue, serene and distant, looking toward something beyond the frame. On the back, in faded print, were words about protection and guidance. Marco held it in his small hand like it was treasure. Luca held Marco and felt something shift in his chest, something he had not allowed himself to feel in 8 years, the possibility that grace was real. His lieutenant Nino, standing in the doorway with his hands folded, said quietly, "We can find her. Give us a name and 2 hours." Luca nodded slowly. "Find her. But do not approach. Just watch. I need to know who she is." Aria got off the shift at the Meridian at 11:17 that night. Her feet ached. Douglas Hale had not spoken to her all evening, which was both relief and danger. When Hale was quiet, it meant he was planning something. She had learned this over the 9 months she had worked at the hotel. She had learned that his silence was a predator's silence, the quiet before the strike. She clocked out in the employee room, changing out of her black dress into the jeans and sweater she kept in her locker. Her palms were bandaged. Her knee throbbed. She had told no one about the accident. At the Meridian, sharing your problems was the same as announcing your weakness. And weakness at this hotel meant being scheduled for the worst shifts, being assigned to serve the difficult tables, being cornered in the walk-in freezer while the manager made comments about your body and your availability. The night was cold when she stepped outside. October in Los Angeles could be bitter, the wind carrying the memory of rain from days before. Aria walked for blocks to the bus stop, carrying the tips she had earned, $19 from 6 hours of labor. She counted them in her pocket like she always did. $47 now. She needed $22,000. The math was a prayer she no longer believed in. The bus came at 11:34. She rode home in the fluorescent light, watching the city pass through the window, and did not notice the black SUV that had followed her from the hotel, maintaining 3 car lengths of distance, never closer, never losing sight. Inside that SUV, 2 men watched her, and one of them was already on his phone. "She works nights," Nino said quietly. 9 months at the Meridian. Single mother, 2 kids, lives in the basement unit on Carlisle Avenue. Go straight home, no detours. Groceries twice a week. Same convenience store. That's it. That's her whole world. Luca listened to this information in his office on the 42nd floor, standing at the window with the prayer card in his hand. The city spread out below him like a kingdom, and somewhere in that kingdom was a woman who did not know she had changed everything. He turned the card over and read the words again. Protection. Guidance. Light in darkness. Tell me about her, he said. Aria Voss. Age 28. Married to a man named Richard Voss when she was 20, divorced him at 23 when he was arrested for assault. She was the victim. He served for years. She was pregnant with her second child when he got out and tried to take custody. She fought him in court. 1. He disappeared. No contact in 5 years. She's clean. No record, no debts except for living expenses, no criminal association. Luca turned from the window. Children? Emma, age 7. Noah, age 5. And there it was. 2 children. A woman who had saved his son without knowing who he was, without expecting anything in return. A woman who clearly understood protection because she had spent years protecting her own children. What does she need? Luca asked. Nino paused. Ma. What does she need? Money? Medical care? Housing? Nino pulled up information on his tablet. She's being evicted. 2 weeks' notice. No way to pay the deposit on a new place. Current rent is $600 a month. Can't afford it. Her employer is stealing her tips and sexually harassing her. She's documented the hours but has no money to hire a lawyer to fight it. Luca felt something cold and dangerous stir in his chest. Something worse than anger. Something like purpose. Her employer. Man named Douglas Hale. 44 years old. Has done this to at least 6 employees in the past 4 years. No one has gone to court because they need the job. The last woman left the state. The prayer card felt heavy in Luca's hand. A woman who had saved his son was being destroyed by a predator. And Luca Bianchi, despite everything he had become, despite the blood on his hands and the graves in his backyard, still believed in balance. Tomorrow, he said. I will go to the school. I will thank her properly. Tony, who was standing by the door, exchanged a look with Nino. Neither man had ever heard their boss express gratitude. In 15 years, they had never heard him thank anyone. Luca saw the exchange and understood it perfectly. He did not care. Something had shifted. The boy was safe. That mattered more than his reputation. That mattered more than everything. The next morning, Aria stood in the breakfast line at Emma's school, holding Noah's hand. She had taken a risk and called in sick to the Meridian, knowing that losing this shift meant losing at least $40. But Emma had a field trip today, and Aria needed to be present for one small moment of her daughter's childhood. One moment where she was not counting money or working or afraid. Emma wore her school uniform, her hair in braids that Aria had woven at 5 in the morning before the sun rose. Mommy, will you come? Emma asked. I will try, Aria said, which was the kindest lie she could offer. She did not see the black SUV pull into the parking lot. She did not see the man in the cashmere coat step out, the prayer card folded in his pocket, the scar on his face catching the morning light. She did not know that Luca Bianchi had come to this school, to this exact moment, because his son had told him that the woman was strong and kind and had saved him. What changed everything was a small voice. That's her, Marco said, limping forward with his physical therapist beside him, pointing directly at Aria. That's the lady. That's the one. Aria turned. Her breath caught. The man walking toward her was expensive in a way she had never seen before. His coat alone cost more than her monthly rent. His eyes were dark and penetrating and completely focused on her. Behind him stood two enormous men in black suits. Around them, other parents were stepping back, creating space, as if recognizing power and giving it room to move. "Ms. Voss?" Luca's voice was deep and steady, like someone used to being obeyed. Aria's mouth went dry. "Yes? I am Luca Bianchi. That is my son, Marco. You saved his life yesterday." The prayer card was in his hand now, worn and soft and unmistakable. Aria felt her legs weaken. I just saw him in the way of the truck. Anyone would have." "No," Luca said quietly. "Not anyone. You. You risked yourself for a child you had never met. This does not happen often in my world." Aria did not know how to respond. She did not understand why this man was here, why he was looking at her like she had done something extraordinary when she had only done what instinct demanded. She did not understand that Luca Bianchi, standing in a school parking lot in the October morning cold, was about to offer her redemption. The rain fell like punishment from the sky. Aria's breath came in shallow gasps as she ran through the Los Angeles night, her shoes splashing through puddles that soaked the hem of her uniform. Behind her, the sound of an engine. A vehicle moving slow, deliberate, hunting. She did not know how long she had been running. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like eternities. Her left eye throbbed where Douglas Hale's hand had connected, swelling shut, the world narrowing to a tunnel of darkness and fear. Handprints bloomed across her throat in shades of purple that looked almost beautiful in the streetlight until you understood what they meant. What they were. What he had done. She turned a corner into an alley, gasping, her legs threatening to give way. The cold October wind cut through her wet clothes like something with teeth. Emma. Noah. The thought of her children sent a fresh wave of terror through her chest. Douglas had said things. Terrible things about what would happen if she told anyone, if she tried to leave, if she did not come back to work tomorrow and smile and pretend nothing had happened. The vehicle stopped at the mouth of the alley. Doors opened. Two silhouettes emerged, backlit by the headlights, their shapes enormous and threatening. Aria pressed herself against the brick wall, her hand finding the prayer card in her pocket, her mother's prayer card, the only thing she owned that mattered. Her fingers traced the worn edges as her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain they would hear it. This was the end. This was how it finished. Not with salvation. Not with rescue. Just with the rain and the cold and the sound of footsteps approaching her hiding place. She closed her eyes. Then a sound split the night. Not footsteps. An engine. A different engine. Tires screaming as a black SUV materialized from nowhere, blocking the alley entrance. The men froze. The SUV door opened. Luca Bianchi stepped out into the rain, his cashmere coat turning dark with water, his scar visible in the yellow light. Behind him, Tony and Nino emerged with the kind of casual precision that came from doing dangerous things for a very long time. The two men at the alley entrance did not move. They did not speak. They simply turned and ran. The sound of their footsteps faded into the October night. Luca approached Aria slowly, his movements measured and careful, the way someone approaches a terrified animal. "It is over," he said quietly. His voice was thick with something she could not name. Rage. Certainty. The sound of a man who had already made decisions that would reshape the world. "You are safe now." But Aria could not move. Could not speak. Could only stare at him as the rain fell and her breath came in shattered pieces. She did not know why he was here. She did not know that Tony had been watching Douglas Hale for 3 days, documenting every moment of cruelty, every stolen tip, every hand that found its way where it did not belong. She did not know that Luca had seen the bruises on her neck in the school parking lot and had made a choice. A terrible, irrevocable choice. 24 hours earlier, in an underground poker room in downtown Los Angeles, cigar smoke hung thick as fog beneath crystal chandeliers. The room smelled of money and power and men who had decided that rules were suggestions for people weaker than themselves. Green felt tables stretched across the floor. Stacks of cash sat in neat towers. Armed guards stood at every door, their hands resting on weapons. 3 rivals of the Bianchi family sat across from one another, playing a game that was not really about cards. It was about dominance. About territory. About who had the right to exist in this city and who did not. Luca Bianchi watched from a private booth above the main floor, his lieutenant Nino standing beside him. They had been watching Douglas Hale for 3 days. Douglas, who managed the Meridian Hotel. Douglas, who pocketed his waitress's tips. Douglas, who had begun to work with Victoria Ashford to squeeze every ounce of profit and dignity from the women who served drinks and cleaned rooms. More importantly, Douglas had made a catastrophic mistake. He had hurt the woman who saved Luca's son. And in doing so, he had violated the one rule that Luca Bianchi took seriously. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. His business is finished, Luca said quietly to Nino. Everything he touches becomes poison. Make it happen before sunrise. Nino nodded. In 15 years of working for Luca Bianchi, he had never heard those words spoken without mercy attached to them somewhere. This was different. This was absolute. At exactly 4:13 in the morning, federal agents arrived at Douglas Hale's home. Not local police. Federal. The kind of law enforcement that meant someone very powerful had made a phone call to someone else very powerful. Douglas was dragged from his bed in front of his sleeping wife, handcuffed, read his rights. The charges were numerous and detailed. Tax evasion. Money laundering. Human trafficking of undocumented workers at the hotel. Wage theft. The list went on. By 5:30, he was being processed at a federal facility downtown. By 6:15, his mugshot was being printed in every newspaper in Los Angeles. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case was thorough and relentless. She had been given files. Detailed files. Documentation. Witness statements. Video evidence. Within 48 hours, Douglas Hale was being offered a choice. Plead guilty to all charges and receive a federal sentence of 40 years, or proceed to trial and risk additional charges that would add another 30 years on top of that. He chose the guilty plea. At 2:06 in the afternoon on a gray October day, the judge sentenced him to federal prison for 4 decades. He would be 71 years old before he saw daylight as a free man. The court ordered restitution. Every dollar he had stolen from his employees was calculated, itemized, and he was ordered to pay it. The numbers were staggering. They would follow him forever. But it was Victoria Ashford who experienced the true destruction. Victoria had built her world on discretion and social standing. On being untouchable. On knowing exactly how much money and influence could buy. She was a woman of 63 years with white hair cut into an elegant bob, diamonds at her throat, a penthouse overlooking the city that cost more than small countries. She had built the Meridian Hotel from nothing 30 years ago. It was supposed to be her legacy. Instead, at exactly 6:22 in the morning, her front door was kicked in by federal agents carrying a warrant. They seized her computers. Her files. Her communications. They found the text messages between her and Douglas. The emails discussing how to intimidate workers into silence. The insurance fraud schemes. The systematic exploitation of vulnerable women. Everything was documented. Everything was admissible. The FBI held a press conference at 9:15 that same morning. Victoria's face was displayed on every television screen in Southern California. Her name was spoken on the news alongside words like fraud, trafficking, and extortion. Within 2 hours, the Los Angeles Times ran a feature article about the women she had exploited. It included their names, their stories, the amount she had stolen from them. By that afternoon, every business partner Victoria had cultivated over decades was distancing themselves. The country club revoked her membership. The charity board that had valued her donations for 20 years sent a letter stating that her services were no longer required. High-profile lawyers refused to represent her. Banks began freezing her accounts pending asset seizure. By evening, she was arrested and held on a $500,000 bail that she could not post. The news traveled through the city like wildfire. 2 people. 2 lives. Completely dismantled not through violence but through the systematic application of law and consequence. Aria stood in her basement apartment, holding Emma and Noah close, watching the television screen where Victoria Ashford's handcuffed image was being broadcast again. She did not fully understand how this had happened. She did not understand what she had done to deserve salvation. The knock on her door came at 7:51 in the evening. When she opened it, Luca Bianchi stood in the hallway, rain still falling outside, his coat still damp. He held a single envelope in his hands. Inside was a check. Not for a small amount. For $22,000. Exactly what she owed. Exactly what was going to save her from eviction. "This is not charity," Luca said, his voice steady and low. "This is payment. For what you did. For who you are." Aria's hands trembled as she held the envelope. She could not speak. Could not breathe. Could only stand there as her children wrapped their arms around her legs, sensing something momentous had shifted in their small world. "Why?" she whispered. "Because," Luca said quietly, "you looked at my son and saw a child worth saving, even though you had nothing. Nothing to gain. Nothing to profit from. You risked yourself for him. That kind of goodness is rarer than anything I have ever touched. It deserves to be protected." He turned and walked back down the stairs into the October night. 1 year had passed. The penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Los Angeles skyline, each light a small miracle against the October darkness. Aria stood at the glass, her reflection ghostly and incomplete, watching the city breathe below her. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that cost more than she used to make in a month. Her hair, once perpetually matted from exhaustion, fell in waves past her shoulders. Her hands, no longer calloused and raw, trembled slightly as she held a glass of water she had not yet drunk. Behind her, in the study that smelled of leather and old books, Luca Bianchi sat with his son Marco. The boy was 7 years old now, his disability no barrier to the brightness in his eyes. Luca held a children's book open on his lap, and he was reading aloud, slowly and deliberately, signing each word with his free hand so Marco could see the shapes his father's mouth made. It was a skill he had taught himself over the past year, sign language learned from videos late at night when he could not sleep, practicing the motions until they felt less foreign than his own heartbeat. "The prince found the castle at the edge of the world," Luca read, his deep voice filling the room like warm light through water. Marco leaned against his father's chest, his small hand reaching up to touch Luca's face, feeling the vibrations of sound in his father's jaw. This was their ritual now. Every evening, the same book, the same careful movements, the same profound attention. Aria turned from the window and watched them through the doorway. She did not announce herself. Some moments required only witnessing. The moment stretched, tender and unbreakable, until Marco looked up and saw her. The boy's face transformed. He scrambled down from the leather chair and ran toward her, his steps still slightly uncoordinated but filled with absolute certainty. He crashed into her legs and wrapped his arms around her hips with the force of a small earthquake. "Mama," he said, his voice high and reedy, the word imperfect but unmistakable. "Mama," he was reading the good part. Aria's knees buckled. She sank to the floor and pulled the child against her chest, and the sound that came from her was not quite a cry and not quite a laugh. It was the sound of a dam breaking after a year of holding still. She had not cried since the night Luca placed the check in her hands. She had been too busy living to cry. Too busy registering for her community college courses, too busy working her new job as an administrative assistant at a non-profit that helped domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives, a position Luca had quietly arranged, asking nothing in return except that she be treated with respect. Too busy moving with Emma and Noah into the small apartment on the 3rd floor of this very building, the rent paid by a foundation that bore her name, the Aria Voss Foundation for Invisible Heroes. But now, holding Marco, she could not hold back the flood. She cried the way people cry when they remember they are allowed to be happy. Luca crossed the room and knelt beside them both. His hand found the back of her head, his fingers threading gently through her hair. "You earned this," he said quietly. His voice moved through the room like a stone thrown into still water, creating ripples that touched everything. "All of this?" "The foundation helped 347 women this year." "You know that?" 347 women who were invisible. "You made them visible." Aria could not speak. She could only hold onto Marco while Luca's other hand rested on her shoulder, the three of them a small constellation of survival and choice. That evening, they sat together in the dining room while the city lights multiplied across the glass. Emma and Noah had already eaten with their new tutor, a young woman who had become essential to their lives. The table held only 4 place settings now: Luca, Aria, Marco, and Tony, who had become something between bodyguard and family. He sat at the far end, eating quietly, his presence a reminder of the world that existed outside these walls. Aria had been telling them about her day, a woman named Sarah who had finally left her abusive partner with help from the foundation, a child enrolled in the new scholarship program Luca had endowed. She spoke with the easy confidence of someone who had learned that her voice mattered. When she finished, Luca set down his fork. He stood from the table without preamble and walked to the windows. The October night pressed against the glass, infinite and cold. "Come," he said simply. Aria followed him to the balcony. The wind caught her dress and pulled it away from her body like living hands. Below them, the city moved through its routines, unaware that on the 42nd floor, a man who had spent 23 years building an empire was about to dismantle the careful architecture of his silence. "I have loved you since the night you saved my son," Luca said. His eyes did not leave the horizon. "Not because you were beautiful, though you are. Not because you were helpless, though you were that too. I loved you because you looked at Marco and saw a child worth saving when you had nothing. Nothing to gain. Nothing to profit from. Most people look at wealth and see what they can extract from it. You looked at my son and saw what you could give to him." Aria's breath came in short, careful pulls. "I have waited because I wanted you to become yourself first," he continued. "I wanted you to know that your value was not dependent on my protection. You have done that. You have become extraordinary." He turned to face her then, and his eyes held the weight of every choice he had made to get here, every mercy he had chosen, every moment he had waited. "I am asking you to build a life with me. Not because I can save you, but because we can save each other." He lowered himself onto one knee. The gesture was so at odds with who he was, this man who had never knelt to anyone, who commanded rooms through presence alone, that it felt like mythology becoming flesh. From his pocket he withdrew a ring. It was not ostentatious. The stone was simple, elegant, old, a ring that had belonged to his mother, who had died when he was 12, who had taught him that goodness was possible even in the darkest circumstances. "Aria Voss," he said, "will you marry me?" She said yes before he finished the sentence. She said yes the way people say prayers, the way they say their own names, the way they confirm the one true thing they have always known. Tony watched from inside the penthouse, his weathered face transformed by something that might have been joy or might have been the simple recognition of a man learning that his boss was human after all. In 15 years, he had never seen Luca kneel. In 15 years, he had never seen Luca choose softness. He pulled out his phone and texted Nino, "It's happening." The wedding took place 3 months later in the garden of a small church in Los Feliz. Aria walked herself down the aisle because she no longer needed to be given away. She was her own origin story now. Emma scattered flowers with the concentration of a child performing an ancient ritual. Noah stood beside Luca at the altar, holding the rings with the seriousness of someone entrusted with miracles. Marco sat in the front row, his eyes bright with the particular joy that exists only in children who have learned they are loved absolutely. The vows were simple. Luca promised to protect her not from the world but from the cruelty of people who did not understand her value. Aria promised to remind him that empathy was not weakness, that goodness was not a luxury. They promised to build something that had never existed in either of their lives before, or a home where invisibility was impossible. Everything Luca Bianchi had touched in his life had been marked by violence or ambition or the need to survive. This marriage was something different. This was redemption written not in blood but in the everyday rituals of kindness, the way he braided Emma's hair on school mornings, the way he learned to cook foods from Aria's childhood, the way he transformed his entire empire into legitimate business, creating the Bianchi Foundation in her name, funding scholarships and safe houses and legal aid for women exactly like her. And meanwhile, in a federal prison cell in Colorado, Douglas Hale counted the days of his 40-year sentence, his hands grown soft without tips to pocket, without women to corner in empty hallways. Victoria Ashford's mugshot circulated endlessly on news outlets, her public destruction complete. She had lost her position, her reputation, her social standing. She sat in house arrest awaiting trial, invisible in a way she had never imagined, finally understanding what it felt like to be no one. This was not mercy. Mercy would have ended quickly. This was justice, systematic, total, and perfectly legal. This was the law becoming the instrument of consequence instead of oppression. 2 years later, Aria held her daughter in the penthouse overlooking the city. The baby was 3 days old, and she was perfect, dark eyes, her father's intensity, her mother's unbreakable will. They named her Lucia, after Luca's mother, after the light that breaks through darkness. That night, Aria stood on the balcony again, but everything was different now. She was not standing at the window of someone else's dream. She was standing in her own miracle, and she understood finally that the greatest magic was not in being saved but in saving yourself and discovering that someone loved you not despite your survival but because of it. The October wind carried the scent of rain coming. Somewhere in the city, another woman was counting pennies, walking through the cold with children who did not yet understand that their mother was the bravest person they would ever know. Somewhere, invisible people were becoming visible. And in the foundation that carried her name, every single day, women were learning that after the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. This story teaches us that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Only love can do that. Only the choice to see someone when the world insists on keeping them hidden. How did Aria's journey make you feel? What would you have done if you were Luca, watching someone struggle while you held the power to help? Have you ever known someone who went through something similar? I want to hear from you. Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. Every single comment you leave is a precious source of motivation that helps us continue creating stories that matter. If this story touched you, subscribe to our channel. Like this video and share it with the people you love. We wish all of you watching good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember, after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video. Goodbye.